Hi everyone, my name is Duke. Just recently, I literally back from the dead. No one expected or believed, except for one person. Now I'll tell you who it is and how it all happened. I hope you enjoy my story, but first, I'm waiting for your likes, comments under the video at the end of viewing, and please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. I grew up in a rich family. I had everything that my age guys can only dream of. I got my first car worth an apartment, and that's not all. Yes, my parents are fabulously rich. They have several businesses, and they have two kids who are like me. Besides me, by the way, there is a daughter. My sister's name is Dakey. Do you want to know what it is? In short, she's a bitch. Dakey also loved not only expensive things, but also people. In short, she did not communicate with poor people. She was not the kind of friend who would comfort you when you were in a bad way, or help you in a difficult moment. She did not show her emotions to anyone, but she did not perceive other people's emotions either. As for me, I was a little bit different. Yes, I was like a kinder side, more understanding, although I was also considered a star, and brash, and a bully. At least my friends liked me better, I knew that, than my friends' girlfriends. Our parents are very busy people. They are almost never in our mansion. Fortunately, we have a lot of servants, and we do not do any chores around the house at all. Our mother owned a whole chain of luxury clothing stores, and she constantly flew somewhere to bring clothes from abroad. My mother wasn't very sentimental either, but my sister took after her, and I, as you may have guessed, look more like my father. Funny and interesting, but the men in our house have a bigger heart than the women's have. When I was a child, someone hurt my sister or me. We ran to my mother to complain, and I got even more from her for allowing such an attitude to myself, and another slap for not being able to solve the problem on my own. It was pretty cruel, but we quickly learned not to tell her anything else, not to complain, and generally to pretend that nothing was happening. But with Dad, it was completely different. Dad felt sorry for us, he kissed Dakey, and hugged me. Dad knew how to choose the right words and support in a real fatherly way. In general, we had enough love, so we grew up until we were all grown up. So one day, I came home drunk enough, I just felt bad. To be honest, I could barely stand on my feet and miraculously got home by car. As soon as I fell into the room and lay down on the bed, my sister called me. For some reason, she was crying and asking for help. I immediately seemed to sober up. I was afraid for her. She asked me to come, and of course, I left immediately. I don't remember exactly how fast I was going, but I was going fast. I remember how I almost got there, how I picked up the phone to check the address with the neighbors. As soon as I unlocked my phone, I saw that some guys and Dakey were standing by the road. She was crying. Out of anger, I wanted to run over them. I drove even more, and lost control. The car overturned and crashed into a tree. I remember opening my eyes, hearing my sister's voice calling for help, and then I had a dream. I dreamed a lot of things, including the moment of the accident. I was trying to avenge my sister. Dakey was crying all the time. I could clearly hear her voice in my sleep. She was asking for forgiveness, and it was so sad. I heard my father's voice, my friend's voice, and then I heard my mother come to me. I also thought that the pancake is going to hit me even more. And the most amazing thing is that I heard her crying. Can you imagine how surprised I was when I first heard her cry? I was used to the fact that my mother's reputation as an iron lady, and it was like this at work, stone as a rock. I heard it many times, and then thought I heard strange voices. I didn't know them. I didn't really understand the speech of strangers, but I still had a dream. It was so long. And then one day, when I'd had a good sleep, I heard my mother crying again, and she was crying as hard as she'd ever cried before. She asked me to come home. I was surprised, because did I sleep somewhere outside the house? I opened my eyes, saw a bright light, and my eyes hurt. I wanted to ask them to close the windows, but I suddenly realized that I couldn't speak because I had something in my mouth. I took a deep breath through my nose and started coughing. At this moment, my mother screamed like a madman. She flew up to me and started shouting my name, then she ran around the room and shouted someone's last name. Immediately a man came running. He pulled all the excess out of my mouth, believed the vital signs, shone flashlights in my eyes, felt my hands, and asked me to tell my name. I answered all the questions and then asked what was going on. My mother came up to me again, and I saw a very old woman instead. Her hair was almost gray, bags under her eyes. She had lost so much weight. I said, "Mom," and she rushed back to me. She was crying and happy, and I couldn't understand what was going on. Finally, after some time, a stranger came up to me again and he told me that I had an accident while driving for my sister. I lost control of the car and it rolled over. I ended up with a head injury and went into a coma. You were in a coma for 10 years, the doctor said. The words hit me like an arrow, and I was scared and panicked. I was in a coma? Why 10 years? Have I lost so much time? I asked myself. I was released from the hospital not immediately, only a week later. The news about me spread around the city, but my mother decided not to accept anyone from the guests yet. I saw my father. My sister begged for forgiveness. As it turned out, I had not dreamed it before. I heard it all. I calmed her down because I really didn't hold a grudge against her. A couple of days later, we went out for a walk and talked about a lot. I noticed that it wasn't just my mother who had changed. Dakey also became more human and sentimental. She told me that on the day I woke up, the doctors had already suggested that my mother turn off the machine that I was using to breathe, because I couldn't do it on my own. Parents' permission was required. My father was ready to sign the paper because he couldn't torment me anymore, but my mother, she didn't agree. She believed in me and shouted that even if I lay in this state for another 30 years, she would agree. Just then, I opened my eyes. You know, it was a real miracle. There are probably 1 in a million cases like me. Despite the fact that I missed so much in life, I now have the opportunity to make up for everything. Plus, the whole situation is that I got to know my mother and sister from the other side, and my mother's love and faith in me did not allow me to die. And this is magical.
How does it feel to wake up during surgery? When you can't move or speak, but you feel everything that's happening to you at this moment. Sometimes I read several similar horror stories before, but I couldn't imagine that I myself would one day encounter this. This is the moment when you feel your organs like someone is swarming in them. Unpleasant sensations. I've always looked after my health. A healthy diet, lots of fruit, and daily workouts. By the way, I play football for the national team of our school. To be correct, I was playing. It didn't seem to mean anything, but once we played in the yard together with a parallel class. The contestants had a guy named Bill on their team. Large build and very clumsy. And what do you think? To my misfortune, he fell with all his weight on me. So much so that I broke all the bones in my foot. Of course, he didn't do it on purpose. At first, I didn't even notice anything from the shock. But when I realized what had happened, the pain suddenly made itself felt. I even lost consciousness for a moment. I only woke up when I was being taken in an ambulance, sitting next to the doctor. When he saw me, he said that he had done anesthesia and would perform the operation, namely, you need to put a plate on the bone. Then I was not able to think about anything, but it was terribly scary. The doctor assured me that this is a standard operation and there's nothing to be afraid of, but I still worried. For me, it was the first operation in my life, and even if everyone around you says there's nothing wrong with it, it's still kind of creepy to imagine how you'll be cut and then dig inside. It's like a horror movie. But the doctors I got a good one. They joked and tried to cheer me up. Already in the operating room, an anesthesiologist approached me and also threw a couple of jokes to diffuse the situation. He put a tube in my nose, and I suddenly felt heavy. Everything swam, and I passed out exactly as it should be. In general, everything went on as usual, but then something happened in this quiet course of the operation that no one could have expected. As far as I remember, I started to wake up slowly. The brain couldn't figure out what was going on. My mind was trying to wake up. My body felt heavy. I tried to open my eyes, but it was difficult. As soon as I opened my eyelids, a bright light was shining directly on my face. After getting used to it a little, I finally opened my eyes completely and for about another minute tried to understand what was happening. I found that a tube had been inserted into my right nostril, and it was probably used for air to breathe better, but my nostril was blocked. I didn't understand what was happening because I vaguely remembered that I was in surgery, and the last thing I remembered was that after I was anesthetized, I asked my assistants to tell me a story before going to bed. I was lying on the operating table, and I continued to do the operation in real time. I felt holes being drilled into my bones one by one. There was no pain. I only felt the moments when the drill passed through the bone wall. It can be compared to how metal plates were drilled in labor lessons. First, the effort, and then abruptly releases. Here and I felt the sound of a drill, don't know how it's called, honey tool, and these pushes time after time. I began to panic wildly, but as they say, trouble does not come alone. The anesthesia must have numbed my entire body, and I couldn't even move my lips. I couldn't scream or move my hands. All that remained was just to watch the process. My head was all mixed up. The doctors didn't even notice that I was awake and continued to operate calmly. I've seen them pass tools to each other. Imagine personally watching how you do the operation and at the same time not being able to somehow draw attention to yourself. It's just something unreal. When the panic passed, I decided that it was probably quite interesting. Not everyone will get this opportunity, you know? And there was no pain, so I even got used to it. But suddenly, one of the assistants glanced at my face and then froze in disbelief. It was obvious she didn't expect this, flustered from the surprise. The girl quickly refilled the tube and added more anesthesia. I fell asleep before the end of the operation, and I woke up when the incision was sewn up. But even then, I should not have woken up. Apparently, my body at that time categorically refused to sleep, but the assistants were already ready for this and already quickly put me to sleep. I woke up in the ward and was recovering a little. At that moment, a doctor came to me and asked how I was feeling. Everything was normal, and I noticed that all the paramedics were crowded behind the door. Apparently, they were very curious to see such a restless patient. I felt like a star. My doctor smiled, but it was obvious that he was very worried about his mistake in front of me. But I'm not offended. On the contrary, I love adrenaline. Have any of you experienced this situation? Tell us under the video, and don't forget to subscribe and share my story with your friends. Can and with them occurred such interesting history.